Okay, we are joined by Allum Bockhari. He is the tech writer for Breitbart News, and he is the author of a new book, Deleted: Big Tech's Battle to Erase the Trump Movement and Steal the Election. Allum, thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Charles. Good to be on.
Well, we've seen a very blatant and recent example of outright censorship where you have these board certified doctors give a presentation on the steps of the Supreme Court and talk about their contention that hydroxychloroquine, and I shudder to even mention the name of that drug because I could be banned for that, but that drug is effective in their treatment of their patients. And also, I believe one of the doctors stated that wearing a mask is not necessary. Now, I grant that that's controversial, and it certainly runs contrary to our establishment thinking right now, the CDC, and other agencies. However, it is a legitimate opinion by legitimate board certified doctors, and yet that video has been banned. People who carried the video have had their channels taken down. It was even I think Donald Trump Jr.'s Twitter account was banned. What the heck is going on here? How are they getting away with that?
Yeah, and Breitbart News' Twitter account's now on day 3 of being locked. We can't put out any new tweets. Twitter is dragging their feet, claiming they've lost the appeals case. But in the meantime, Breitbart News hasn't been able to tweet for 3 days during election season. Facebook, meanwhile, they took down our video, which was simply news coverage. We weren't offering any commentary. We weren't saying whether the doctors were right or wrong. We were simply covering a press conference. Facebook saw fit to take that down, even though it was the most popular post across their platform that day, had over 17 million views before it was censored, so the public were clearly interested in it. But Facebook and these other tech companies have decided that they're the ultimate authorities on medical opinion. They're even going to censor a press conference with doctors, and obviously, doctors will disagree. I'm sure many doctors disagree with the doctors who spoke there at that event. But is it Facebook's Facebook's place to decide for its users whose medical opinions they want to hear and whose they don't?
One of the things that's so sweeping and revealing about this is that they all seem to do it in a coordinated way. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, all the usual suspects, Google. And yeah, I'm saying this as someone who has a small show on these networks. So, I'm kind of reluctant to do it, and I'm grateful to have the opportunity. However, I'm going to go forward anyway. I mean, this is a seems like a coordinated decision to censor this particular opinion. What is it about their opinion that is so pissed off the establishment here?
Well, I think social networks, these big tech companies, largely follow the direction of the mainstream media when it comes to controversies like this. The media created a huge panic about this drug. And, I'm not a medical expert, but it's clear that it's not a miracle cure, but it's also not a deadly poison. But the media whipped up this huge panic over it being super dangerous. And big tech has followed their lead on that. And it's not the first time we've seen them do that. YouTube, for example, we released a leak from inside the company, I believe it was 2 years ago, showing that they reordered their search results for the search term abortion 2 hours after a Slate journalist complained that there were too many pro-life videos in the top 10 results. It's not the first time they did that. They also reordered search results for the search term Federal Reserve after MSNBC's Chris Hayes complained. So they've got a long history of simply doing whatever mainstream journalists tell them. And, I do think there's a reason for that, because we've seen in the past mainstream media has been able to whip up huge panics against these social networks, against these big tech platforms. We saw the Wall Street Journal and the Times, many other newspapers back in 2017, essentially instigating a massive advertiser boycott of YouTube, cost them hundreds of millions of dollars. More recently, the media has been encouraging, tacitly encouraging or nudging advertisers to boycott Facebook because it thinks they aren't censoring enough. So
Yeah.
big tech are very afraid of the mainstream media, and I think it's following their lead.
And the amazing thing about this is that you have liberals in the media who are glorifying this and praising it and saying this is great. We should censor them. We should stop them. These are people who maybe in the past would have been standing up for free speech. Now, I understand that you don't want to have, speech that could lead to violence or any insurrection, which of course that they do allow. Putting that aside, uh, getting back to the case of the doctor's press conference, they weren't suggesting that people go out and just take this drug. They were simply suggesting that the government allow hospitals and doctors to provide it with prescription under doctor supervision. It was not There was nothing about that that would have been in any way harmful to anyone. I mean, this is it was completely within the realm of what the medical establishment should do and is supposed to do. And I mean, I just wonder what if there's some kind of a motive there, to given the fact that, by the way, this drug is being used in countries around the world very successfully. It's being used throughout Latin America. In fact, in Brazil and I think in a couple of other countries, it's actually sold over the counter. France has used it, Israel's used it, Germany has used it as a way to reduce cases. So it's not like it doesn't have any record of relative success, and it doesn't have any record of harming people.
Yeah, I mean, it's been used for over half a century as an anti-malaria drug. I think the agenda here is very simple. President Trump touted it, therefore the media is against it. It's that simple. They've used it as a means to attack him and discredit him. That's their agenda here, and social media platforms are playing along. One thing I will add, though, I mean, while I think the media led the way on this one, there are also, the tech companies aren't simply following the lead of the media. Especially when it comes to broader issues of censorship. They have their own far left employees who are constantly pressuring from the inside for these platforms to do more to suppress the right, to suppress the Trump movement. That's why so many prominent supporters of the president have been kicked off these platforms over the past 4 years. And lastly, it also comes from the very top. We saw after the 2016 election, we got video of Google's executives reacting to Trump's win with complete shock and dismay, and the co-founder saying he was deeply offended by the election result. That's a direct quote. We had another Google executive, Kent Walker, saying he wanted to make the populist movement a blip in history. He said if they didn't do that, then there might be a world war. It's not an exaggeration. He actually said that. So this runs right through these big tech companies. They're extremely far left, and they're censoring with impunity in an election year because there's no law, no oversight preventing them from doing so.
Now, the day after the banning of the doctor's video, there was testimony before Congress by Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos and the head of Google and some other people. And I got a chance to watch some of that, particularly Zuckerberg's testimony when he was questioned by conservative congressmen and asked, why are you censoring conservative opinion? And as usual, I mean, his answer was very slippery. It was very much like, well, I don't handle that part of the operation. I'll look into it. I'll get back to you. Uh, what did you ascertain from the testimony the other day by the big high tech uh, titans?
Well, it's always, plausible deniability with them, right? They'll say, well, we're not targeting conservatives specifically, we're just targeting so-called hate speech or so-called misinformation or so-called conspiracy theories. Of course, the way these tech companies interpret those terms is always in a way where conservatives fall under the definitions of those, and the left and the mainstream media does not. I haven't seen Rachel Maddow kicked off any social media platform for suggesting Vladimir Putin has blackmail material on Donald Trump, obviously a completely hysterical conspiracy theorist claim. I didn't see many left-wing reporters kicked off Twitter when they went after those Covington High School kids who wore MAGA hats with, death threats and threats of violence. Some of them had their tweets deleted, but if the right was doing anything similar, they'd be permanently banned from these platforms. So the rules only go one way, even if tech companies say they apply to everyone.
Oh, I mean, exactly. I mean, the concept of conspiracy theory, they were pushing the biggest conspiracy theory I've seen in my lifetime for years. And that was the idea that Donald Trump is a Russian spy. So I mean, this is, I mean, in a sense, a free press, we're supposed to take a look at conspiracies, whether they be criminal or political. I mean, that's why we have free speech. That's what we're supposed to do. I mean, as long as you don't start to point a finger at various ethnic groups, I get that, or religions, and say that they're involved, because that's false and that's defamatory. But to look at groups of people engaging in conspiracies, that's the warp and woof of media. That's what we're supposed to do. Uh, I guess, Ala, my question to you is, what can be done? I mean, they have these vague, nebulous standards of community and whatnot. Can't we make them publish a very specific bill of agendas with regard to what they view as community standards and not, so we can then know at least what we're doing? We don't have to think about waking up the next day and finding everything 500 videos removed.
Well, their terms and their rules are getting vaguer and vaguer. They now have this new concept called so-called borderline content, I believe they call it. Content that doesn't violate their rules, but I think the word they use is brushes up against them, and they use that as an excuse to suppress content in search results, and just down rank them in the algorithms. They never tell people who have been targeted this way, so it's a covert form of censorship, which I believe is possibly even more dangerous than the overt form of censorship, banning people, because with the covert form, you don't even know you've been affected, and no one knows how many people it affects. So, I mean, the amount of, especially when you consider the fact that Donald Trump used social media, especially Twitter, so effectively in 2016 to bypass the very biased mainstream media, it's very dangerous for his re-election chances, the fact that so many of his supporters, so many friendly media outlets have been kicked off or either overtly censored or covertly censored over the past 4 years.
So they really responded to President Trump's victory with an attempt to step up censorship against anyone that didn't genuflect to their particular point of view. And here we are in the election year. We're seeing a noticeable and observable uptick in this censorship program. Now, these social network giants like Google and the rest of them, they control probably 95% of the social media platform. It is monopolistic. I would argue that it is a monopoly in the classic sense, in the same way that President Teddy Roosevelt faced a monopoly from Standard Oil, and he busted it up into seven pieces. In the same way that the telecommunication industry was monopoly in the 1980s with Ma Bell. They busted that up into seven pieces, and the result was good. The result was that the price of uh, cell technology eventually, but any kind of telecommunication went down drastically as they had to compete. What can be done now, do you think, to bust up this obvious collusion, if I may coin a phrase, of the high tech social network platforms and their efforts to expunge opinions that they don't agree with?
Well, first of all, you're absolutely right. They are monopolies. One example, Apple and Google between them control 99% of the smartphone operating system market. Google dominates search, Amazon dominates e-commerce. 100% monopolies, but even more dangerous than previous monopolies. I mean, Ma Bell did not stop Republicans from calling voters, but these tech platforms are stopping one side of the political aisle from being heard. They have an unprecedented influence over the flow of information and thus over democracy and public discourse. It's very, very dangerous. As far as what can be done, I certainly think the Republicans missed an opportunity when they controlled all three branches of government in the early years of the Trump administration. They didn't take steps to reform big tech's legal immunities that allows them to censor with near impunity. And we're just now seeing some strong action from the administration in the form of the recent executive order on social media censorship, the petition to the FCC. So we'll see what happens there. There are some good people in the administration now. Adam Kandayev now is part of the administration. He's a law professor at Chicago who's done some very good analysis on the legal privileges of big tech. I think he'll do a good job. But I don't think, I have to say, that anything can be done before the election.
Right.
So the challenge for conservative voters is how do you get the message out in spite of big tech censorship?
Well, that is the question, and I guess I was going to ask you, what about some of these alternative venues that are coming up? I mean, I'm somewhat hopeful with Parler, for example, which is a good alternative to Twitter. I don't know much about Parler, who runs it or whatnot, but I've noticed a lot of conservatives, a lot of people that aren't on the left, are opening up accounts on Parler, including myself, and are getting traction, are getting views. There's a couple of others coming down the pike. Do you see anything happening in terms of any companies mounting legitimate and real opposition to these behemoths, these monsters?
Yeah, well, both Parler and Gab have been doing this for a while, trying to create an alternative social media ecosystem. The problem is it's very hard to challenge the market power of these companies when they've advanced to such a degree, especially when sometimes the competitors are simply kicked out of the app stores. I believe Gab was kicked out of both Apple's App Store and Google's App Store, which effectively
Yeah.
takes them away from the vast majority of smartphone users. And this is why it's a monopoly and competition issue as well. I think conservatives really need to go old school this election. They have to go back to email lists. They have to go back to emailing, their friends, their coworkers, especially undecided voters, links to news stories that these websites are suppressing.
Hmm.
Because the real danger here is that undecided voters, when they want to find out about a candidate, they're going to go on platforms like Google and Facebook to get their information. They won't realize that these sites are biased because obviously they don't follow the news, political news, as closely as partisans do. So the challenge to Republicans, I think, is to get the message out to those undecided voters through methods that aren't social media, that aren't big tech platforms.
Maybe go back to the old-fashioned mailing list. But you know, the censorship and the collusion actually transcends even social networks, because you mentioned that that they have cut people's legs off in terms of trying to earn a living. I mean, PayPal has deplatformed people trying to get paid for their services online, who don't fit into a right modality. I'm thinking in this case of Gavin McGinnis. I'm not supporting him, but he has legitimate points of view and he's fine. More recently, Stefan Molyneux. Again, I don't endorse his views, but he's a philosopher. He's got an opinion. It's not, he doesn't deserve to have his 10 years of work online and his thousands of videos simply removed one day when he wakes up and turns on his computer. Uh, and the way they go about it, besides deplatforming, is that they take away their ability to get paid. I think they did this with Gab. They took away PayPal, shut down their account. The only way to get Gab now is you have to send them a check. You have to do it the old-fashioned way.
Not just
So,
paper, uh,
excuse me.
yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it shows that the monopolistic nature of this is much broader than we can even imagine. I mean, of course, you do a good job, Alum, of documenting this in your book, Deleted: Big Tech's Battle to Erase the Trump Movement and Steal the Election, which is exactly what it is. And it's very troubling and very concerning. It should be for all of us, whether you like Trump or not. Do we really want to have big tech decide who is going to be the next president? Isn't that what they were complaining about with Russia? Russia, Russia, Russia. Well, now it's big tech, big tech, big tech. Alam, tell my viewers and listeners how they can get your book and read your articles and get more information about you.
Well, you can find my articles on Breitbart.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at Libertarian Blue. Also on Parler at AB, and Gab at also at AB. To find my book, just search on Amazon for #deleted, Big Tech's Battle to Erase the Trump Movement and Steal the Election. It's certainly going to be a massive threat this time around, and we're going to see how much power these tech companies really have, because this time they're not going to be complacent.
Well, I just hope that your book gets more and more traction as we get closer to the election, because the censorship is going to get uglier and meaner and more pervasive, especially if President Trump starts to really show that he's going to win. And he is starting to show that. Polls are turning around because people do have enough common sense to see this, hopefully. And I think that we have to sort of work together and stick together and try to help each other in this very hostile atmosphere online as a way to try to do an end run around the censors and the ghouls who are trying to shut down opinion. Anyways, Alan, on that note, I want to thank you for joining me today.
Well, it's great to be on.
Thanks a lot.